and I'm delighted that we'll be joined next by Mr. Liam Halligan. He is an economist. He is also a columnist at the Telegraph, and he's an author of When the Facts Change on his Substack. I am a huge fan. I've always loved talking to Liam. How are you, sir?
Very well. Nice to see you, Jonathan.
Well, good to see you too. Now, Liam, I really find you refreshing because I always like the way that you have a dry, sarcastic humour about the current state of the UK economy. And now we've had Tom Kerridge, who ironically signed letters saying vote Labour, and is now obviously very upset that since voting Labour that they're killing his pub. Now we've got Gordon Ramsay, who's not one for mincing his words. He has said the industry is facing a bloodbath. I've never seen it so bad. When I look ahead to April, when the budget measures come in, I think those of us in hospitality are lambs to the slaughter. What's happening to pubs is madness. There was already one shutting every day before these proposed rises in business rates and taxes. They're being crippled. I mean, Liam, does this surprise you? How bad is it? How much do the public know just how damaging the hospitality sector, restaurants and pubs are about to be clobbered by this Chancellor?
Well, ordinarily, Jonathan, you'll know as a former government minister, the idea of business rates is a kind of humdrum backwater of economic policy. What are business rates? Business rates are taxes placed on businesses that have physical premises, even if they don't own the premises, based on the so-called rateable, or if you like, rental value of those businesses. So shops pay business rates, pubs pay business rates, hotels and restaurants pay business rates, warehouses pay business rates, and so on. Of course, the online giants, when they sell over the web, they don't pay business rates on their premises. So high business rates is one reason why a lot of our high streets in British towns and even big cities, even in the southeast, are often hollowed out because the high-tech online retail giants don't have those same business costs. And the thing about business rates, Jonathan, is that you're liable for business rates not only as a business before you've made any profit, but even before you've taken any revenue in at all. You have this massive tax bill that you must meet, and it's very, very onerous. And I thought the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, was pretty disingenuous, as I'm afraid she quite often is. In her last budget statement, she says, "Oh, business rates are coming down," but the rate at which business rates are charged may have been coming down, but the valuations placed on businesses went up enormously. And as some of the reliefs that were given to business rates during COVID to help businesses get through have been completely withdrawn, a lot of businesses, particularly in the retail and hospitality sector. The hospitality sector, of course, very labour intensive. The cost of employing people's gone up a lot. Minimum wage increases, particularly for the young, employer national insurance increases. So these service industries, these retailers, and particularly the pubs and the restaurants, which are very labour intensive, you need lots of staff, their costs have just gone absolutely through the roof. Plus their energy bills have gone through the roof. Business utility costs, absolutely crazy increases. So I think for a lot of high street retailers, and particularly a lot of high street hotels and restaurants and pubs, this business rate increase, which for a small pub can amount to 20, 30, 40 grand extra a year. Well, for many businesses, that's what the main person running the business earns for working 80, 100-hour weeks, keeping their business going. So this business rate increase is really, really harming a lot of firms, particularly a lot of service sector firms, particularly a lot of restaurants, hotels and pubs. Now, it seems after a big campaign, particularly by my newspaper, The Telegraph, Reeves is going to give some kind of reprieve to pubs, because so many publicans have literally banned their local Labour MPs from pubs. And it is a massive issue. I grew up in pubs. A lot of my family are publicans, came over from Ireland, ran pubs. My old man ran his small business basically from a bar stool in a pub, a small building business. I know how important pubs are, not necessarily to the bien pensant, flashy media class. They go for wine bars and dinner parties. But many ordinary people across the UK, the pub, it's a place of doing business. It's a social support mechanism. It's, we talk about mental health. Without your local, a lot of people will be lost. And I think Labour has really had to bite the bullet here, smell the coffee, if you like. A lot of pubs do coffee these days, of course, and they've given pubs some kind of reprieve. No wonder the likes of Gordon Ramsay, Tom Kerridge, and restaurant owners, hoteliers across the country are feeling really peeved because the pubs seem to have got some kind of a reprieve, but not the hotels, not the restaurateurs, and not other businesses with premises. They're going to be paying, in many cases, much higher business rates.
Well, Liam, this is the problem, isn't it? Because as you say, some research published by the Conservative Party has suggested between 2024 and 2025 to 2028, 2029, some of these pubs, for example, would see a 317% increase in their business rates. Some hotels at 398%. I mean, this is truly shocking stuff. As you say, tens of thousands in many cases, where for, pubs, they're talking about having to sell an extra 100,000, 150,000 pints in order just to cover
and people
the
aren't
additional
going to
cost.
pay 8, 9, 10 quid for a pint. They're just not going to do it. They just won't go to the pub.
Exactly.
They'll go to the supermarket and get some cheap beer from a supermarket and sit at home and watch the telly. And what will we have lost? And a lot of those pubs will then be, given over to the developers for luxury flats, and whole communities will become husks of what they previously were. Look, this is what happens when you have a state that's so overbearing, where the tax burden is already at a 70-year high. And it seems that Labour's ideology is to ever expand the state. The answer to all the country's problems is always more government, more tax, more state. And clearly it isn't. Big parts of our economy cannot be taxed anymore or they will disappear. And that is happening in every town in the UK on our high street.
The Telegraph, as you say, has done great work on making sure there's going to be this U-turn or partial U-turn. I think we're waiting for the detail, Liam, from the Chancellor for pubs. But as you rightly point out, how are hotels and restaurants, and if I look at places like Stoke-on-Trent, it's already hard to get that kind of local economy thriving once again because people are being squeezed in their own pockets. They haven't got the disposable income that they used to have. If for hotels in particular in places like Stoke, where you're desperately trying to interest a corporate kind of group or use the sort of tourist attractions, Wedgwood for example, and Potteries Museum and Art Gallery with the Spitfire on display there. But by racking those up, like you say, all you're going to do is squeeze out anyone wanting to go on holiday and vacate within the UK, and that has then that extra knock-on effect, particularly in those touristy destinations in places like the Cotswold, the Peak District, but also those many seaside towns that are already being clobbered to death over the years.
There aren't that many aspects of the UK economy that are world-class these days. I think we can come back. I'm an optimistic person. I think a lot of the policies we've seen, frankly, from both main parties over the last 10 to 15 to 20 years have been deeply counterproductive. But one area where we are really good is the service sector, in particular tourism. We're a very, very visited country. You talk about Stoke-on-Trent, where I obviously used to be the MP. There's so much to see around Staffordshire. It's such an interesting place, not necessarily with huge respect the most fashionable part of the country, but for many people, whether they're elsewhere in the UK or from overseas, seeing parts of the UK, local hotels used for businesses, used for tourism, they're very, very, very important. They're big local employers. They give a lot of families those little part-time jobs that make the difference, that mean families can keep their standards of living up to a decent standard. And if these little businesses are absolutely hammered by the slab tax, which is business rates, you've got a business, you haven't taken in a single pound this year, you obviously haven't made any profit, but you are still liable for this massive expense on top of the rent that you pay for your premises, on top of everything else that you have to pay, on top of the extra costs of employing people through a much higher minimum wage, much higher employer national insurance, Labour's Employment Rights Bill, which takes us back to the 70s, massively increasing the cost of employment. I tell you what, Jonathan, I was a young political correspondent back in the mid and late 90s when Tony Blair launched New Labour. I knew all the New Labour front bench. They were well different from Starmer's front bench, not least because they weren't as ideologically left-wing as Starmer's front bench, but some of them actually knew about business and had run businesses and had launched, formed, grown and sold businesses. They'd made payroll. There is no one on the Labour front bench that has any idea of what it takes to run a business. Not a single person, and there's no one in Downing Street either who has a feel for business, and it shows.
Liam Halligan, an amazing columnist and it's columnist at The Telegraph. Thank you so much for joining us here and sharing us your views. Always a pleasure to hear them, and we need to hear them because, blimey, are things looking glum? Well, let us know what you think. Have Labour killed the pubs, the hotels, the restaurants and the shops in your communities? How bad is it already, and do you fear it's about to get a whole lot worse?